Welcome to History and Sleep, the place where stories of the past gently guide you into rest. Tonight, we'll journey to the heart of the 16th century, exploring one of the most intricate and transformative conflicts in European history, the Italian Wars. Have you ever wondered how a series of wars over the Italian peninsula could involve so many of Europe's greatest powers and reshape the continent's balance of power for generations? If this sounds unfamiliar, don't worry, you're in the perfect place to learn more. Settle in, relax, and let the story of the Italian Wars unfold like a gentle stream, guiding you toward rest. This tale begins in a time when Italy, though culturally rich and bursting with Renaissance brilliance, was fragmented into competing city-states. It was a land coveted by powerful kingdoms and empires, each seeking control over its wealth and strategic position. From the ambitions of France and Spain to the complex political intrigues of the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire, this was no ordinary conflict. Before we dive into the causes and outcomes of this monumental struggle, please take a moment to comment where you are listening from and what time it is for you. We love connecting with our audience, and if you enjoy these stories, please consider subscribing to our channel so we can continue to deliver these sleep stories to you. We're also trying something that was requested by some of you guys about adding more stories to our experience, so stick around to hear the cool stories we have after this. Let's begin. As the 16th century dawned, Italy stood as one of the most vibrant and culturally rich regions in Europe. It was the heart of the Renaissance, its cities alive with art, science, and intellectual thought. Yet beneath this brilliance lay a fragmented political landscape that would spark decades of turmoil. Unlike the unified kingdoms of France and Spain, Italy was a collection of fiercely independent city-states and kingdoms, each vying for dominance. From the maritime might of Venice to the artistic hub of Florence, from the papal states wielding both spiritual and temporal authority to the militarized Duchy of Milan, the Italian peninsula was a patchwork of ambition and rivalry. This division made Italy uniquely vulnerable. The city-states frequently clashed over territory and trade routes, expending resources and forming unstable alliances. Instead of uniting against external threats, they often sought outside powers as allies in their internal disputes. France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire, each with their eyes on Italy's wealth and strategic importance, were quick to exploit these divisions. To them, Italy was not just a cultural treasure trove, it was a gateway to greater influence in Europe and the Mediterranean. Adding to this complex web of politics was the immense power of the papacy. Popes of this era were not merely religious leaders, but political figures deeply involved in Italy's affairs. They negotiated alliances, raised armies, and often pursued personal and familial ambitions under the guise of defending Christendom. The Church's wealth and land holdings made it a significant player in the power struggles that shaped the region. Popes like Alexander VI and Julius II used their positions to influence the balance of power, turning Rome into both a battleground and a prize. The Renaissance further heightened the stakes. Italian cities were not only politically and economically important, they were also cultural beacons. The competition among states to sponsor the greatest artists, thinkers and architects added another layer of rivalry. Florence became synonymous with innovation, Venice dominated trade, and Milan built its reputation on military strength and strategic alliances. These states, despite their brilliance, often overestimated their ability to control the forces they unleashed when inviting foreign powers to intervene in their disputes. The spark that ignited the Italian Wars came in 1494, when Charles VIII of France, claiming a dynastic right to the Kingdom of Naples, marched his army across the Alps. His invasion was the result of years of political manoeuvring and alliances gone awry. Florence, Naples and Milan had all played roles in drawing France into Italian affairs, hoping to use Charles's ambitions to their advantage. Instead, they unleashed a force far greater than they anticipated. The French army, with its modern artillery and disciplined soldiers, overwhelmed local defences, setting off a chain reaction that drew in Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and eventually even the Ottoman Empire. The Italian Wars were not a single conflict, but a series of battles and campaigns lasting over 6 decades. They were fought not just for territorial control, but for dominance over Europe itself. Italy became the battleground where the ambitions of France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire clashed, with Italian city-states caught in the middle. The fragmented nature of the Italian peninsula, once a source of cultural diversity and wealth, now became its greatest vulnerability. As you reflect on this intricate political landscape, imagine the bustling cities of Renaissance Italy, filled with life and brilliance, yet shadowed by uncertainty. Picture the delicate balance of power, like a fine thread stretched too tightly, waiting to unravel. Let the rhythm of this story settle over you, its complexity and beauty easing your mind as you relax further into a state of calm. The first act of the Italian Wars began in 1494 when Charles VIII of France launched his invasion of Italy, claiming his dynastic right to the Kingdom of Naples. This campaign marked the first time a major European power would openly stake its claim to Italian lands, setting off a chain reaction that would embroil the continent in conflict for over 60 years. The decision to invade was driven by a combination of ambition, opportunity, and the fractured political state of Italy itself. Charles VIII saw Italy as a land of immense wealth and prestige, its city-states filled with treasures that could bolster his power and finance his ambitions in Europe. Yet his claim to Naples was not entirely self-driven. He had been encouraged by Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, who sought to use French support to consolidate his own power and counter his rivals in Florence and Venice. This invitation would prove a double-edged sword, for while Charles's army marched with incredible strength, it also disrupted the delicate balance of power that had kept Italy relatively stable. The French army was unlike anything Italy had faced before. Equipped with advanced artillery and professional soldiers, it swept through northern Italy with alarming speed. The city-states, unprepared for such a modern force, quickly capitulated or offered little resistance. Florence, long a hub of Renaissance brilliance, was forced to submit to Charles's demands, its leader Piero de' Medici attempting to placate the French with territorial concessions. This sparked outrage among the Florentine people, leading to the ousting of the Medici family and a period of tumult in the city. As Charles pressed southward, his campaign continued to unsettle Italy. The Papal States, under Pope Alexander VI, faced immense pressure to negotiate with the French king, who posed a direct threat to Rome itself. Ultimately, Alexander chose diplomacy over confrontation, allowing Charles to pass unimpeded. The French army reached Naples in 1495, capturing the city with relative ease. Yet the ease of their victories belied the challenges that lay ahead. The rapid success of the French invasion alarmed the rest of Europe. Ferdinand II of Aragon, whose Spanish crown had her claims to Naples, saw the French presence as a direct threat to his interests. He joined forces with the Holy Roman Empire, Venice and Milan in the formation of the League of Venice, a coalition designed to expel the French and restore balance to Italy. This alliance marked the beginning of a prolonged and complex series of conflicts that would characterise the Italian Wars. Charles VIII's return journey to France was fraught with difficulty. At the Battle of Fornovo in 1495, the League of Venice confronted the French forces in a fierce engagement. Though Charles managed to escape with most of his army intact, his dream of holding Naples dissolved as Spanish forces moved to reclaim the city. This marked a turning point. While the French had demonstrated their military might, their inability to sustain control over Italy revealed the limits of their power. The first invasion set the tone for the Italian Wars, a conflict defined by shifting alliances, brutal battles, and the constant interference of foreign powers in Italian affairs. For the Italian city-states, the war underscored their vulnerability. Their reliance on external allies often backfired, leaving them at the mercy of larger powers whose interests rarely aligned with their own. As you reflect on this chapter of the story, picture the vast French armies marching through the Italian countryside, their movements echoing the ambitions of kings and the fragility of states. Imagine the Renaissance cities, so full of life and beauty, now shadowed by the weight of war. Let the rhythm of these thoughts guide you into deeper relaxation, the flow of history calming your mind and easing your spirit. As the Italian Wars progressed, Spain emerged as a dominant force, reshaping the balance of power across Europe and the Italian peninsula. Following Charles VIII's retreat, Ferdinand II of Aragon sought to strengthen Spain's influence, focusing on reclaiming Naples, a key prize in the struggle for Italian supremacy. Spain's military, under the leadership of Gonzalo Fernández de Córdoba, revered as the Great Captain, introduced innovative battlefield strategies. The Spanish tercios, disciplined formations combining pikemen and arquebusiers, proved revolutionary. Their effectiveness surpassed that of the traditional heavy cavalry favoured by France. In a series of decisive battles, including Cerignola and Garigliano in 1503, Spanish forces secured Naples. Their victories demonstrated superior tactics and organisation. With Naples under Spanish control, Ferdinand established Spain as a key power in southern Italy, solidifying its influence and preparing for further engagements with France. Yet the French were far from deterred. In 1515, Francis I ascended to the French throne and reignited his nation's ambitions. His forces achieved a major victory at the Battle of Marignano, reclaiming Milan and briefly restoring French dominance in northern Italy. This resurgence set the stage for an intense rivalry between Francis III and Charles V of the Habsburg dynasty. Charles, inheriting a vast empire that included Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and territories in the Americas, wielded immense resources. His ambitions extended far beyond Italy, but the peninsula became a crucial theatre of war. The pivotal Battle of Pavia in 1525 marked a turning point. Spanish forces decisively defeated the French army, capturing Francis I in the process. This victory shattered French momentum and solidified Spanish Habsburg dominance in Italy. Milan fell under Habsburg influence, and Spain's position became unassailable. Despite these triumphs, the Italian wars were far from settled. France continued its efforts to reclaim lost ground. However, Spain's wealth from its burgeoning empire in the Americas provided the resources needed to sustain prolonged campaigns. This economic advantage, combined with strategic alliances and military innovation, ensured Spain's supremacy. Italian city-states such as Venice, Florence, and the Papal States became entangled in this larger conflict. Their independence increasingly compromised as foreign powers dictated the region's fate. The conflict reshaped Italy, turning it into the epicenter of European power struggles. Its vibrant cities and cultural landmarks endured cycles of war and occupation. Yet through it all, the resilience of its people shone. They continued to create art, foster innovation, and maintain their identity even amid turmoil, while you drift further in sleep. Picture the rolling hills of Italy and the bustling cities of the Renaissance, their beauty and complexity undiminished despite the shadow of war. Imagine the measured rhythm of history, the ebb and flow of ambition and resilience, and let the cadence of these thoughts guide you toward peace. Each detail of this story invites you to unwind, to let go of the day's tension as the calm of the past eases your mind. By the early 1520s, the Italian wars reached a brutal and transformative juncture, a moment that underscored the devastating consequences of prolonged conflict. The sack of Rome in 1527, carried out by the forces of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, marked one of the darkest chapters of the era. It exposed the vulnerability of even the most powerful institutions, including the papacy, to the chaos of war. This catastrophic event was not entirely planned. It was the result of unpaid and unruly soldiers, primarily Spanish and German mercenaries, who had grown discontented with their leaders. These troops, driven by desperation and greed, turned their frustrations toward the city of Rome. On May 6, 1527, they breached the city's walls. Their assault was swift and merciless, reducing the Eternal City to a scene of horror. Thousands of civilians were slaughtered, churches and homes were looted, and priceless works of art were destroyed or stolen. The Pope himself, Clement VII, was forced to seek refuge in the Castel Sant'Angelo, where he remained under siege for months. The sack of Rome sent shockwaves throughout Europe. It demonstrated that no city, no matter how revered or powerful, was immune to the ravages of war. This act of violence shattered the image of the Holy Roman Empire as a protector of Christendom. Instead, it revealed the unpredictable nature of power struggles when greed and chaos overtook strategic planning. The symbolic heart of Catholicism had been desecrated, leaving a lasting scar on the Italian wars and a sobering reminder of the stakes involved. The fallout from this event led to a re-evaluation of alliances and power dynamics. The Pope, who had previously aligned with France and other anti-Habsburg factions, was forced to reconcile with Charles V. This uneasy alliance reshaped the political landscape of Italy, placing the papacy firmly under Habsburg influence. For the French, the sack represented another setback in their ambitions to dominate Italy. the devastation of Rome weakened their potential ally, leaving them increasingly isolated in the conflict. As the dust settled, the sack of Rome came to symbolise the broader toll of the Italian wars. The conflict had begun as a battle for territorial control, but it had evolved into a far-reaching struggle that disrupted the cultural, economic and political fabric of Italy. The Renaissance ideals of beauty, innovation and humanism were overshadowed by the relentless march of armies and the ambitions of rulers. Even amid this devastation, Italy's resilience persisted. The people of Rome began to rebuild their city, reclaiming their identity and striving to restore its former glory. Artists, writers and thinkers carried forward the flame of the Renaissance, their works a testament to the enduring spirit of a land caught in the crossfire of history. As you look back on this pivotal moment, imagine the quiet streets of Rome after the storm, the strength of its people as they turned chaos into renewal. Let these thoughts ease your mind, and the flow of history soothe your spirit as you drift into deeper relaxation. The story of the sack of Rome reminds us that even in the darkest times, recovery and renewal are possible. The Italian wars, though technically concluded with various treaties and shifting allegiances, left Italy deeply fragmented and politically unstable. By the late 16th century, the city-states that once flourished during the Renaissance had been absorbed by the larger European powers or reduced to minor players in the geopolitical theatre. The outcome of the wars had profound consequences, not only for Italy, but for the balance of power across Europe. After the sack of Rome in 1527, the political situation in Italy grew more complicated. The papacy, weakened and diminished in prestige, was now firmly under Habsburg influence. Pope Clement VII, despite his earlier resistance, was forced to sign a peace treaty with Emperor Charles V, marking the start of a period of Habsburg dominance in Italy. The French, now dealing with internal turmoil and an empire stretched thin, were no longer able to exert as much influence over Italian affairs. Milan, once a powerful independent duchy, had fallen under Habsburg control following the French defeat at Pavia and the subsequent Treaty of Madrid. Similarly, Naples and other southern Italian regions were now under Spanish rule. Venice, though still a powerful republic, found itself increasingly isolated, unable to maintain its former influence in the face of Habsburg and French competition. Florence, once the heart of the Renaissance, experienced a dramatic shift in power. The Medici family, exiled during the wars, were restored to power with the help of the papacy and the Habsburgs. Under their rule, Florence became a duchy, ending its Republican era and cementing Medici control. This marked the end of an era for the city, which had once been a beacon of artistic and political independence. The fragmentation of Italy was not only political but cultural. The wars had disrupted the flow of ideas and artistic movements that had flourished during the Renaissance. Many of Italy's greatest artists, including Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael, had already passed, and those who remained found themselves working under foreign rulers who had little interest in maintaining the cultural vibrancy that had once defined the peninsula. The wars also set the stage for future conflicts. The power vacuum left in Italy, coupled with the continuing rivalry between France and Spain, ensured that Italy would remain a battleground for European ambitions well into the 17th century. The Italian states, once autonomous and rich in their diversity, had been transformed into pawns in a larger game of European politics. Yet, even in the aftermath of destruction and division, Italy's identity remained intact. The Renaissance had planted seeds of intellectual, artistic and scientific achievement that would continue to influence the world long after the wars had ended. Italy's cities, though scarred by years of warfare, would eventually rise again, fueled by the legacy of those who had once shaped the course of history. As you reflect on this final phase of the Italian wars, picture Italy, its cities, landscapes and people, rebuilding in the wake of centuries of conflict. Let these thoughts soothe your mind, the quiet endurance of a nation marked by the passage of time. Feel the ebb and flow of history calm your spirit, as the struggles of the past slowly fade into the background, leaving only peace. As we bring this story to a close, it's important to summarise the deep legacy left behind by the Italian wars. Though the wars themselves were marked by conflict, power struggles and shifting allegiances, Italy's resilience and cultural spirit endured beyond the violence. The wars may have fragmented the peninsula politically. However, the intellectual, artistic and cultural achievements that flourished during the Renaissance would continue to shape the world for generations to come. The devastating toll of the wars, especially the sack of Rome and the subsequent political upheavals, left visible scars on Italy's landscape. But even in the midst of destruction, Italy's cities, its people, and its rich cultural heritage would rise again. Florence, Venice, Rome, and Milan, though under foreign rule, maintained the essence of their identity, always connected to their storied past, and each continuing to contribute to the broader European narrative. As you lie back and reflect on this powerful chapter in history, allow yourself to feel the weight of time, the rise and fall of empires, the rebuilding of cities, and the ever-present determination of the people. Imagine the sun setting gently over the Italian hills, the soft whisper of the wind as it sweeps over the ancient streets, a reminder of both struggle and renewal. It's easy to be caught in the frenzy of the world around us, but history has a way of slowing us down, letting us reflect on the cyclical nature of life, conflict, and peace. Let the story of the Italian wars be a reminder of resilience, of the strength it takes to overcome adversity, and of the beauty that rises from the ashes. Now, as we transition to the peaceful sounds of rain and soft melodies, let your mind settle into the rhythm of nature, allowing the soothing sounds to wash over you, easing you into a deep and restful sleep. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. Now enjoy more fascinating war stories with rain and peace that will surely leave you happy. May your dreams carry you to a place of calm reflection. Sweet dreams. We'll uncover the extraordinary tale of the Night Witches, the daring Soviet women aviators of World War II, flying under the cover of night in fragile biplanes without defensive weaponry. These brave women struck fear into the hearts of Nazi soldiers. Their courage earned them the legendary nickname Night Witches, a testament to their unyielding determination and skill in the face of overwhelming odds. Have you ever wondered what it took to fly night after night on dangerous missions, knowing that survival was far from guaranteed? If not, stay with us for this remarkable journey into their story. Before we begin, I'd like to invite you to comment down below where you're listening from and what time it is. It's wonderful to connect through these shared stories of the past with you. And if you enjoy these thoughtful journeys through history, please consider subscribing to our channel so we can continue to bring you these reflective narratives. Now, take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, and settle in as we begin this reflective journey into one of World War II's most remarkable chapters, the legacy of the Night Witches. As the war raged on the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union found itself in desperate need of every resource, including its people. In 1941, Marina Raskova, often called the Soviet Amelia Earhart, petitioned Stalin to form an all-women's Air Force regiment. Stalin approved the request, paving the way for what would become the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, later immortalised as the Night Witches. The regiment was made up entirely of women, from the pilots and navigators to the mechanics who maintained the planes. These young women, many just teenagers, volunteered to fly in conditions few others could endure. They trained rigorously, mastering combat manoeuvres, night flying techniques, and bombing runs with minimal equipment and resources. Despite facing skepticism from male soldiers, they earned respect through sheer determination and unmatched bravery. Their aircraft of choice, the outdated Polikarpov Po-2, a simple wooden biplane often used for training rather than combat. These planes were slow and offered no protection against enemy fire, but they had one advantage. They were nearly silent when gliding in for a bombing run. The only sound enemy soldiers heard was a soft whooshing noise, reminiscent of a broomstick cutting through the night air. It was this eerie silence that earned the women their witch-like moniker. Despite the fragility of their planes, the women of the 588th embraced their mission. They flew night after night, braving freezing temperatures, anti-aircraft fire, and the constant threat of being shot down. Each mission was a test of skill and courage, but the Night Witches never faltered. As the weeks turned into months, the harsh Russian winter set in, adding another layer of misery to the already dire conditions. Temperatures plummeted, and both sides struggled to survive in the freezing cold. Supplies dwindled, and hunger and disease took their toll. Yet, despite the suffering, the Soviets held firm. Reinforcements and supplies continued to trickle into the city across the frozen Volga River, ensuring that the defenders could maintain their resistance. The turning point in the Battle of Stalingrad came in November 1942 with the launch of Operation Uranus. The Soviet High Command, led by General Georgy Zhukov, devised a bold counteroffensive to encircle the German Sixth Army. While the Germans just were focused on their assault within the city, the Soviets launched massive attacks on the weaker flanks of the German forces held by Romanian and Italian troops. The plan was a success. Within days, the Soviet pincers closed around Stalingrad, trapping the German Sixth Army inside the city. What followed was a desperate struggle for survival. The encircled German forces, numbering over 300,000 men, were cut off from supplies and reinforcements. Hitler, refusing to allow a retreat, ordered Paulus to hold the city at all costs. The Luftwaffe attempted to airlift supplies to the encircled troops, but the efforts were insufficient. The soldiers inside the pocket faced starvation, freezing temperatures, and relentless Soviet attacks. The Soviets tightened their grip on the city, systematically destroying the remaining German positions. The defenders' situation became increasingly hopeless, and morale plummeted. In January 1943, the Soviets launched their final assault to crush the pocket. By this time, Paulus and his men were exhausted, demoralized, and out of options. The Battle of Stalingrad remains one of the most studied and remembered events of World War II. It serves as a testament to the courage and determination of those who fought, and as a reminder of the horrors of war. The sacrifices made at Stalingrad helped shape the course of history, paving the way for the eventual Allied victory. As you drift into sleep tonight, let the story of Stalingrad remind you of the strength of the human spirit and the resilience that emerges in the face of adversity. Imagine the quiet, snow-covered streets of the rebuilt city, the echoes of history carried gently on the wind. Let the bravery and sacrifice of those who endured inspire a sense of gratitude and peace within you. The story of the Battle of Stalingrad did not end with the surrender of the German Sixth Army. Its aftermath rippled far beyond the frozen streets of the ruined city, shaping the course of World War II and the history of the 20th century. The Soviet victory was a turning point, not just for the Eastern Front, but for the entire Allied effort. It demonstrated the determination and resilience of the Soviet people and marked the beginning of a relentless push to drive the Axis forces out of the Soviet Union and eventually defeat them in Europe. The cost of the battle was nearly unimaginable. The casualty figures are staggering, with estimates placing the total number of dead, wounded, or missing on both sides at over 2 million. Civilians caught in the crossfire endured unimaginable suffering as the city they called home became a war zone of unthinkable destruction. Homes were destroyed. War is rarely without its toll, and for the Night Witches the cost was often heartbreakingly high. Despite their unmatched bravery and skill, they were not immune to tragedy. The fragile Polikarpov Po-2 planes offered no protection from bullets or shrapnel, and enemy fire sometimes found its mark. Crews that had shared countless flights together would sometimes never return, their absence a painful reminder of the risks they faced every night. The loss of comrades weighed heavily on the women of the regiment, yet they found ways to carry on. They honoured the memories of those who were lost by pressing forward, flying mission after mission with the same fierce determination. Their courage in the face of such adversity became one of their defining traits, inspiring not only their fellow aviators, but also the Soviet troops who admired their relentless spirit. Despite the grief and danger, the Night Witches maintained an unwavering sense of duty. The knowledge that their missions were essential to disrupting German advances fueled their resolve. They understood that every successful sortie weakened enemy morale, disrupted supply lines, and brought the Soviet forces one step closer to victory. Their perseverance was not only a testament to their physical endurance, but also to their mental and emotional strength. Each flight demanded a delicate balance between fear and focus, yet the women found ways to manage the overwhelming pressure. Bonds of sisterhood grew stronger as they leaned on one another for support, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection between missions. They found solace in small victories, completing a successful bombing run, evading enemy fire, and returning safely to base. Each night brought new challenges, but the courage that defined these women never wavered. They knew that despite the grim realities of war, their efforts were contributing to a larger goal, defending their homeland and paving the way for eventual peace. Their resilience in the face of both personal and collective loss is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope can endure. Let that resilience guide you tonight, as these stories become not just echoes of history, but symbols of quiet strength and determination. For decades, the memory of Stalingrad shaped the Soviet Union's identity and its portrayal. On the global stage, the battle was celebrated in films, literature, and art, each retelling emphasizing the unity and determination of the Soviet people. The city became a pilgrimage site for veterans, their families, and historians seeking to understand the profound impact of this defining moment in history on a more personal level. The stories of those who fought and survived the battle have been passed down through generations. Veterans shared their experiences with their children and grandchildren, ensuring that the sacrifices made at Stalingrad would never be forgotten. These personal accounts, filled with both sorrow and pride, add depth to the historical narrative and remind us of the humanity behind the statistics. Globally, Stalingrad has become a symbol of resistance and perseverance. Its name is invoked in discussions of strategy, endurance, and the high cost of war for historians and military scholars. The battle offers countless lessons on tactics, leadership, and the interplay of morale and logistics for ordinary people. It stands as a reminder of what can be achieved when the human spirit refuses to yield. In recent years, efforts have been made to preserve the memory of Stalingrad, while fostering a spirit of reconciliation. Memorials and museums now serve not only as places of remembrance, but also as venues for dialogue and education. They encourage visitors to reflect on the consequences of war and the importance of working toward peace. The city of Volgograd, while forever tied to its past, is also a thriving modern metropolis. Its people have rebuilt their lives and created a vibrant community that honours its history. While looking to the future, the scars of the battle remain in some places. The total number of casualties is estimated at over 2 million, making it one of the deadliest battles in human history. These figures include soldiers from both sides, as well as countless civilians caught in the crossfire. The German Sixth Army, led by General Friedrich Paulus, was one of the most formidable forces in Hitler's military. At its peak, the Sixth Army was comprised of over 300,000 soldiers. By the end of the battle, nearly 91,000 German soldiers were taken prisoner, including General Paulus himself. The Soviet strategy of hugging the enemy, staying in close combat to neutralize the Germans' artillery and air superiority, played a critical role in the city's defense. This tactic turned the urban ruins of Stalingrad into a deadly maze for the German forces. Vasily Zaitsev, a Soviet sniper, became a symbol of the defenders' resilience. During the battle, he is credited with killing over 225 German soldiers, including enemy snipers, which boosted the morale of his comrades. Operation Uranus, a Soviet counteroffensive launched in November 1942, was a brilliantly executed maneuver. By attacking the weaker flanks of the German forces held by Romanian and Italian troops, the Soviets were able to encircle and trap the German Sixth Army within the city. The German soldiers trapped in the encirclement known as the Kessel, or cauldron, endured horrific conditions. They faced starvation, freezing temperatures, and relentless Soviet assaults. Supplies delivered by air were woefully inadequate, leading to widespread suffering and death. One of the defining moments of the battle was Hitler's refusal to allow Paulus to retreat or break out of the encirclement. This decision sealed the fate of the Sixth Army and marked us. As your thoughts drift and your eyelids grow heavy, let the story of Thomas Edison be a gentle guide into a world of dreams. Perhaps in your dreams, you will find yourself in a quiet laboratory, a spark of inspiration glowing softly in the darkness. Or maybe you'll wander through a city newly illuminated, the streets alive with the wonder of a world transformed. Thank you for joining us tonight on this journey through history. Remember that within every quiet moment lies the potential for discovery, and within every restful night lies the promise of a new day. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more calming stories of history's greatest minds. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with light, curiosity, and the gentle hum of possibility. Good night. Military achievement. It is a story about the quiet strength found in overcoming fear, the peace that can be found in perseverance, and the power of working together towards something greater than oneself. Imagine, as you listen to this story, that sense of strength flowing through you, a gentle but steady current of resilience, carrying you to a place of peace and rest. Picture the silent glide of their planes over darkened fields, the soft rush of air as they neared their targets, and the quiet resolve in their hearts. Let the calmness of their courage settle into your own mind. With every peaceful breath you take, feel the weight of the world gently lift. The Night Witches not only changed the course of the war, they also broke barriers and shattered expectations, showing the world that there is power in unity and there is strength in every person no matter the odds. Their legacy is a reminder that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it is as silent and powerful as the glide of a plane through the night sky. Now, as their story fades into a quiet reflection, let the peaceful sounds of rain fall softly around you. Feel the gentle rhythm of the rain, each drop a soft reminder to slow down, relax, and allow yourself to drift into rest. The whispers of history, like the rain, will carry you into a peaceful sleep, safe, secure, and embraced by the quiet strength that surrounds you. As we come to the end of this chapter of history, take a moment to reflect on their bravery and unyielding spirit. In the stillness of their courageous flight, there was a quiet power that transcended the chaos of war. Just as the night sky would eventually give way to dawn, so too does each story find its peaceful resolution. Imagine, as the night grows quiet, that you're surrounded by that same calmness, the gentle hush of the world settling down for rest. The bravery of those women lives on not only in the records of history but in the peace that now surrounds us. Their legacy is a reminder that even in the darkest moments there can be light, and even in the harshest of circumstances there can be moments of serenity. Now, as you settle into the rhythm of your own breath, feel the weight of the day melt away, just as the tension of war faded with time. Let your mind find comfort in knowing that, like the Night Witches, you too can navigate life's challenges with courage, strength, and a deep sense of peace. As you rest, the sound of rain softly fills the space around you, a gentle lullaby that invites you to drift even deeper into relaxation. The quiet strength of the Night Witches will guide you to a place of rest, where sleep comes naturally with peace and comfort. Thank you for joining us on this journey with history and sleep, and as always, if you enjoy these stories, don't forget to subscribe. Now may the story of the Night Witches bring you joy, thankfulness, and relief. Let the peaceful sounds of rain carry you into a deep, restful sleep. Sweet dreams, and good night. Now let's take a calming journey into one of the most defining chapters in American history, the Civil War. This was a time when a divided nation faced unimaginable struggles, but also moments of incredible resilience and transformation. Have you ever wondered what truly led to this conflict? What sparked such profound divisions? And how did the people who lived through it endure the hardship and uncertainty? If you're curious, or simply looking for a peaceful story to accompany your evening, stay with me. Together we'll gently unravel the roots of the Civil War, reflect on its major events, and explore the enduring lessons it offers us today. Now let's ease into the story, take a deep breath, get cozy, and let's begin the tale of the American Civil War, a story of division, courage, and the hope for a better tomorrow. The American Civil War didn't happen overnight. It was the result of tensions that had been building for decades, tensions rooted in profound differences between the North and South. At the heart of it all was the issue of slavery. In the South, slavery wasn't just an institution, it was their economy. Cotton fields stretched as far as the eye could see, and the labour of enslaved people made the South incredibly wealthy. But it came at an unbearable cost. The humanity of millions denied, their voices silenced. In the North, things were changing. The Industrial Revolution was taking hold, and with it came growing calls to abolish slavery. People were starting to speak out more, questioning how a nation built on the idea of liberty could allow such a system to exist. This wasn't just a difference of opinion, it was a clash of values, one that only grew louder as time went on. Then there was the question of states' rights. Southern leaders believed they had the right to govern themselves without interference, especially when it came to slavery. They feared that the federal government, growing stronger by the year, would strip them of their autonomy. On the other side, many in the North believed that a united country required a strong central government, one that could uphold the principles of freedom and equality. The country tried to hold itself together through compromise. The Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, these were like bandages on a wound that just wouldn't heal. Each new agreement seemed to deepen the mistrust between the North and South. By the 1850s, things were nearing a breaking point. Laws like the Fugitive Slave Act demanded that even people in free states help capture runaway slaves, and that outraged abolitionists. Books like Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin brought the horrors of slavery to light, stirring emotions on both sides. Then came politics. The Republican Party was formed, with a platform that directly opposed the expansion of slavery. When Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860, it was the final straw for the South. His victory wasn't just a political loss, it felt like a direct threat to their way of life. Southern states began to secede from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America, and just like that, the country reached its breaking point. The differences that had been simmering for so long finally boiled over, leading to a conflict that would redefine what it meant to be an American. As you think about these divisions, take a deep breath. Picture the people living through this time, the fear, the hope, the uncertainty. Let the weight of their struggles soften as you relax, knowing that history is full of lessons about resilience, progress, and the power of moving forward. By the spring of 1861, the tensions that had been tearing the nation apart finally reached a boiling point. In Charleston, South Carolina, a small Union garrison stationed at Fort Sumter found itself surrounded by Confederate forces. The fort had become a symbol of defiance for the Union and a test of legitimacy for the Confederacy. Both sides knew that what happened there could set the tone for what was to come. After weeks of tense standoff, Confederate forces under the command of General P.G.T. Beauregard demanded that the Union troops surrender the fort. When Major Robert Anderson, the Union commander, refused, the Confederate forces opened fire on April 12, 1861. For 34 hours the cannons roared, lighting up the harbour with fiery streaks and deafening booms. The soldiers inside Fort Sumter endured the bombardment as best they could, but with no reinforcements and supplies dwindling, Major Anderson had no choice but to surrender. The fall of Fort Sumter was more than just the opening act of the Civil War. It was a spark that ignited the passions of both the North and South. News of the attack spread like wildfire, stirring anger and determination on both sides. In the North, President Abraham Lincoln issued a call for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion. The response was overwhelming, with men from towns and cities across the Union stepping forward, ready to fight for the preservation of the nation. In the South, the bombardment of Fort Sumter was seen as a declaration of independence. More states, including Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee and Arkansas, joined the Confederacy. The divide was now complete, the lines drawn between two very different visions of America. The early days of the war were marked by a sense of optimism on both sides. Many believed the conflict would be brief, with one decisive battle bringing it to an end. Young men marched off to war with confidence, their families cheering them on with flags and songs. But beneath the surface, the reality of what was to come was far graver than anyone could imagine. As you think about the beginnings of this war, allow your mind to soften its grip on the tension. Picture the soldiers standing on the shores of Charleston Harbour, their breaths visible in the cool dawn air, their thoughts uncertain but resolute. Imagine the cannon fire fading into silence, replaced by the gentle rhythm of waves lapping against the shore. Let this moment remind you that even in the face of division, hope and resolve can endure. As the war moved from the hopeful marches of its early days to the grim reality of prolonged conflict, the battles became larger, bloodier, and more devastating than anyone could have imagined. Names like Antietam, Gettysburg, and Vicksburg became etched into the collective memory of a nation forever changed by the horrors of war. In September 1862, the Battle of Antietam unfolded in Maryland. It was a single day of unimaginable carnage. Soldiers clashed in cornfields and along winding roads, with cannon fire and musket shots tearing through the air. By the end of the day, more than 22,000 men were dead, wounded, or missing. The ground was soaked with blood, and the scale of the losses left an indelible mark on those who survived. But out of this tragedy came a turning point. President Lincoln used the Union's strategic victory at Antietam to announce the Emancipation Proclamation, redefining the war as a fight not just to preserve the Union but to end slavery. Then came Gettysburg, the battle often seen as the turning point of the war. For 3 days in July 1863, Union and Confederate forces clashed in the rolling hills and fields of Pennsylvania. The stakes were enormous and the fighting relentless. On the third day, Confederate General Robert E. Lee ordered a bold assault known as Pickett's Charge. Thousands of Confederate soldiers marched across an open field under withering Union fire. The charge failed, leaving the Confederate army battered and retreating. Gettysburg marked the beginning of the end for the Confederacy, but the cost was staggering. More than 50,000 casualties in just 3 days. Further south, the Union Army achieved another critical victory at Vicksburg, Mississippi, securing control of the Mississippi River. The campaign was grueling, with soldiers enduring sweltering heat, constant skirmishes, and the hardships of siege warfare. When Vicksburg fell on July 4th, 1863, the Confederacy was effectively split in two, a devastating blow to their cause. These battles revealed the full weight of the Civil War, not just in numbers but in the profound human cost. Families mourned the loss of fathers, brothers and sons. Soldiers bore the scars of battle, both physical and emotional. The countryside was littered with the remnants of war, broken cannons, torn flags, and fields that once grew crops now filled with unmarked graves. As you reflect on these moments, let your thoughts rest lightly on the courage of those who lived through these battles. Picture the quiet after the storm, the fields growing still, the sun setting over the hills, and the long shadows stretching across the land. Let this image of stillness and resilience bring a sense of calm to your own thoughts, reminding you that even in the darkest times, there is always a path to healing. While the Civil War raged on the battlefields, the lives of those who remained at home were transformed in ways that were just as profound. Families were torn apart, communities reshaped, and everyday life became a constant balancing act between hope and hardship. In the North, industry boomed as factories shifted their focus to produce weapons, uniforms, and supplies for the Union Army. Women took on roles they had never imagined, working in factories, managing farms, and volunteering as nurses. Clara Barton, who would later found the American Red Cross, became a symbol of this era, tirelessly caring for wounded soldiers and earning the nickname the Angel of the Battlefield. But even as the war effort created new opportunities, it brought heartache, with families anxiously awaiting news from the front lines. In the South, the war brought devastation. Cities like Atlanta and Richmond were transformed into hubs of Confederate military activity, but as Union forces advanced, they left a trail of destruction in their wake. Fields that once grew cotton and tobacco now stood fallow or burned. With so many men away fighting, women and children were left to manage farms, often without the resources they needed. Food shortages became common, and Confederate currency quickly lost its value, plunging families into poverty. Both sides experienced the emotional toll of war. Letters became lifelines, offering glimpses of love, worry, and resilience. Soldiers wrote about the hardships they faced, while their families wrote back with words of encouragement and longing. These letters carried the weight of entire relationships, connecting lives separated by hundreds of miles. In addition to the physical and emotional struggles, the war also brought questions of identity and purpose. Enslaved people in the South began to seize opportunities for freedom as Union forces advanced. Some escaped to the North, while others joined the Union Army, fighting for their own liberation and the promise of a new life. The Emancipation Proclamation, announced in 1862, gave their efforts a powerful voice, transforming the war into a fight not just for unity but for justice. Amid all this upheaval, communities found moments of solace. Churches became places of gathering and prayer, offering comfort to those who had lost so much. Music, too, became a source of strength. Patriotic anthems, sorrowful ballads, and spirituals filled the air, reflecting the hopes and fears of a nation at war. As you reflect on the home front, allow yourself to feel the weight of these quiet acts of resilience. Picture a mother sewing by candlelight, her stitches steady even as her heart aches with worry, or a soldier reading a letter from home, finding strength in the words of love and hope. Let these moments of humanity remind you of the enduring power of connection, even in the face of immense challenge. By 1864, the Civil War had entered its fourth year. The hope for a quick resolution had long faded, replaced by the grim reality of a war that seemed to have no end. But momentum was beginning to shift. The Union, under new and determined leadership, launched a series of campaigns that would bring the war to a close, though not without immense sacrifice. General Ulysses S. Grant had risen to command the Union forces, bringing with him a relentless strategy of total war. Unlike his predecessors, Grant was willing to engage the Confederate armies directly, knowing that the Union's superior numbers and resources could eventually wear them down. His overland campaign in Virginia was brutal, with battles like the Wilderness and Cold Harbor leaving tens of thousands dead. Yet Grant pressed on, earning the nickname Unconditional Surrender for his unwavering resolve. In the Deep South, General William Tecumseh Sherman carried out his infamous March to the Sea, cutting a path of destruction from Atlanta to Savannah. Sherman's goal was to break the South's will to fight by targeting not just its armies, but its infrastructure and resources. Railroads were torn up, factories dismantled, and crops burned. The devastation was immense, but it succeeded in crippling the Confederacy's ability to sustain the war. As Union forces closed in, Confederate morale began to crumble. Desertions increased, supplies dwindled, and the reality of defeat loomed. In April 1865, General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, the backbone of the Confederate forces, found itself surrounded near the village of Appomattox Courthouse. With no hope of escape, Lee met with Grant to negotiate surrender. Their meeting on April 9, 1865, marked the end of the war's major fighting. The terms Grant offered were generous, allowing Confederate soldiers to return home with their horses and personal belongings. His intention was to heal the nation rather than humiliate its defeated half. It was a moment of quiet dignity, the beginning of a long and difficult process of reconciliation. Yet, even as the war ended, its cost was staggering. More than 600,000 lives had been lost, and much of the South lay in ruins. President Abraham Lincoln, who had guided the Union through its darkest hours, would not live to see the fruits of his efforts. Just days after Lee's surrender, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer, plunging the nation into mourning. The war had answered two critical questions. The Union would endure and slavery would not, but it left behind deep scars, both physical and emotional, that would take generations to heal. The Reconstruction era that followed was fraught with challenges, as the nation struggled to rebuild and redefine itself. As you reflect on the end of this monumental conflict, let the weight of its lessons rest gently in your thoughts. Imagine the quiet after the surrender, the weary soldiers returning home, the fields gradually returning to life, and the first rays of hope shining through the darkness. Let these images remind you of the strength it takes to rebuild and the enduring resilience of the human spirit. When the guns fell silent and the soldiers returned home, the United States was a changed nation. The Civil War had been a crucible, testing the very foundation of the country and reshaping its identity forever. Though the fighting was over, the legacy of this monumental conflict continued to echo through the generations, shaping the path forward for a fractured but hopeful nation. One of the most profound outcomes of the war was the abolition of slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation had begun this process, but it was the 13th Amendment, ratified in December 1865, that formally ended the institution that had defined so much of the nation's conflict. Millions of formerly enslaved people began new lives, but the road ahead was steep. The promises of freedom were met with resistance, and the Reconstruction era revealed just how deep the division still ran. The war also redefined the relationship between the states and the federal government. No longer would the question of secession hang over the Union. The victory of the North solidified the idea that the United States was not just a collection of states, but a single, indivisible nation. It was a hard-fought truth, one that cost countless lives but ultimately preserved the Union. Yet the scars of war were everywhere. The South faced immense physical and economic devastation. Cities had been reduced to rubble, and entire communities were struggling to rebuild. The loss of so many men left families broken and towns forever changed. Even in the North, where victory was celebrated, the weight of the sacrifices made was impossible to ignore. For the soldiers who fought, the war left an indelible mark. Some returned home to rebuild their lives, carrying memories of camaraderie and courage. Others bore wounds, both seen and unseen, that would shape the rest of their days. Memorials began to rise in towns across the country, honouring the fallen and reminding future generations of the cost of conflict. The Civil War also left a legacy of storytelling. Veterans shared their experiences, songs from the era became part of the cultural fabric, and writers like Walt Whitman and Ambrose Bierce captured the emotional depth of the war in poetry and prose. These stories served not only to remember, but to help a nation heal, to bridge the gaps between North and South, and to offer lessons for the future. As you reflect on the legacy of the Civil War, let the enormity of its lessons settle softly in your thoughts. Imagine the strength of a people rebuilding from such a devastating chapter, the resilience to start anew, the courage to face an uncertain future, and the hope that guided them toward a brighter horizon. Let these reflections fill you with a quiet sense of gratitude and peace. Now we'll journey back to one of the most turbulent periods in European history, the 30 Years' War, a conflict so vast it shaped the destinies of nations, religions, and even the way wars would be fought in the centuries to come. But here's a question to ponder. What started as a regional dispute in the Holy Roman Empire could erupt into a war that spanned 3 decades and involved almost every major power in Europe? If you're unsure, settle in and follow the story as we unravel this fascinating chapter of history together. Now, let's step into the 17th century and explore the origins of the 30 Years' War. Our story begins in the early 17th century, a time when Europe was a patchwork of kingdoms, principalities, and religious divides. At the heart of this patchwork lay the Holy Roman Empire, a vast and fragmented realm that stretched across much of Central Europe. For centuries, tensions simmered beneath the surface, as Catholic and Protestant states vied for power, influence, and the right to practice their faith freely. The spark that ignited this long and devastating conflict came in the form of a defiant act in the city of Prague. In 1618, Protestant nobles in Bohemia, angered by perceived restrictions on their religious freedoms under Emperor Ferdinand II, staged a dramatic rebellion. They stormed Prague Castle, seized 2 imperial officials, and hurled them out of a window in an event known as the Defenestration of Prague. Miraculously, the officials survived the fall, but the act was a clear declaration of defiance. This single moment set off a chain reaction, like ripples spreading across a still pond. Ferdinand II, a staunch Catholic, saw the rebellion as a direct challenge to his authority in the Catholic Church. Determined to restore order and Catholic dominance, he mobilized his forces, while Protestant leaders across the empire began rallying their allies in preparation for a larger struggle. What began as a localized conflict in Bohemia quickly escalated into a broader war, drawing in neighboring regions and foreign powers. Protestant princes sought support from allies in Denmark, Sweden, and beyond, while Catholic states turned to Spain and the powerful Habsburg dynasty for aid. The war was no longer just about Bohemia. It had become a contest of religion, politics, and territorial ambition. As the conflict unfolded, it became clear that this was not a war of quick resolutions. The early battles were fierce yet inconclusive, leaving both sides entrenched in their positions and more determined than ever to secure victory. The countryside began to bear the scars of the war. Villages burned, crops were destroyed, and innocent lives were caught in the crossfire. The 30 Years' War was born out of these divisions, and its origins reveal much about the fragile balance of power and belief in Europe at the time. It was a conflict rooted in faith, but also fueled by ambition and fear, a perfect storm that would rage for decades. Take a moment to absorb this beginning, the first ripples of what would become a vast and relentless storm. As we move forward, the intricate web of alliances, battles, and betrayals will unfold. But for now, let the gravity of this moment settle, a reminder of how one act of defiance can echo across history. As the conflict in Bohemia ignited, the deeper fault lines of Europe's religious divide began to widen, casting a shadow over the entire continent. At its core, the 30 Years' War was fueled by the tensions between Catholics and Protestants, a struggle that had simmered since the Reformation in the 16th century. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 had attempted to create harmony by allowing rulers within the Holy Roman Empire to determine their state's religion, whether Catholic or Lutheran. Yet this fragile peace left many unresolved issues, particularly with the rise of Calvinism, a branch of Protestantism that had not been recognised in the agreement. As Calvinist states gained influence, the Catholic Habsburg rulers viewed them as a threat. Their growing presence felt like a challenge to the established order. When Ferdinand II ascended to the throne of the Holy Roman Empire, he was determined to restore Catholic dominance. His unwavering faith and aggressive policies further inflamed tensions, especially among Protestant states that viewed him as a tyrant bent on crushing their freedoms. Ferdinand's allies in Spain and the papacy provided him with support, reinforcing the Catholic position with resources and manpower. On the other side, the Protestant Union, a coalition of Protestant princes, mobilised to resist Ferdinand's ambitions. They sought aid from Protestant powers beyond the empire, including Denmark, Sweden and England. These nations saw the conflict not only as a religious struggle, but also as an opportunity to weaken the Habsburgs and expand their own influence. The war spread beyond Bohemia, spilling into regions such as the Palatinate, Saxony and Bavaria. Each new front brought devastation to towns and villages, as armies marched across the countryside, leaving destruction in their wake. The brutality of the conflict became evident in battles such as the Battle of White Mountain in 1620, a crushing defeat for the Protestants that marked the beginning of Ferdinand's efforts to reassert Catholic control. But despite Catholic victories in the early years, the war refused to subside. Protestant leaders rallied, drawing on the resources and military expertise of their allies. Sweden, under King Gustavus Adolphus, emerged as a formidable force. His disciplined armies breathed new life into the Protestant cause. The balance of power began to shift and the war escalated further. This was no longer a simple struggle between Catholics and Protestants. It became a war of ambition and survival. Smaller states and mercenary armies joined the fray, drawn by promises of plunder and pay. The war became a theatre of chaos, where alliances shifted and even traditional enemies found themselves fighting side by side in pursuit of their goals. As the conflict deepened, it transformed the very nature of warfare. The 30 Years' War was one of the first conflicts where civilian populations suffered as much as, if not more than, the soldiers. Famine, disease, and displacement became common, as entire communities were uprooted or destroyed. The war's religious roots became intertwined with the politics of power, and its escalation revealed the fragility of peace in a divided world. As we move to the next chapter, consider the human cost of these divisions, the lives touched by a conflict that seemed endless, yet always teetered on the edge of resolution. By the late 1620s, the Protestant cause seemed to falter, their forces weakened by defeats and dwindling alliances. But the entry of Sweden into the war, under the leadership of King Gustavus Adolphus, marked a turning point that would reshape the conflict. Gustavus Adolphus was not just a ruler, he was a visionary military leader whose innovations in strategy and tactics would leave a lasting legacy on warfare. Gustavus Adolphus believed deeply in the Protestant cause, but his intervention was also driven by Sweden's strategic interests. The Habsburgs' growing influence threatened Swedish dominance in the Baltic region, making the 30 Years' War a matter of survival and sovereignty for his nation. With the backing of France, which sought to undermine Habsburg power despite being Catholic, Sweden entered the fray in 1630, bringing with it a disciplined and modernised army. The Swedish forces brought a new energy to the Protestant struggle. Gustavus Adolphus introduced revolutionary military tactics, emphasising mobility, coordination, and the use of combined arms, integrating infantry, cavalry and artillery into a cohesive fighting force. These methods gave his troops a significant edge over the larger but less organised armies of the Catholic League. The Battle of Breitenfeld in 1631 was a defining moment, a stunning victory for the Swedes and their Protestant allies. Gustavus Adolphus's army decimated the Catholic forces, demonstrating the effectiveness of his strategies. This victory not only bolstered Protestant morale, but also drew new allies to their cause, shifting the balance of power in the war. Under Gustavus Adolphus's leadership, the Protestant forces began to reclaim territory lost in earlier phases of the war. They advanced deep into the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, challenging Ferdinand II's dominance and threatening the stability of the Habsburg realms. Gustavus Adolphus's charisma and tactical brilliance earned him the loyalty of his troops and the respect of his enemies. But his triumphs were not without cost. In 1632, at the Battle of Lutzen, Gustavus Adolphus achieved another critical victory, but lost his life in the process. His death was a severe blow to the Protestant cause, yet his legacy endured. The momentum he had generated allowed Sweden to remain a dominant force in the war, and his military innovations continued to influence the strategies of both sides. As Sweden's intervention reshaped the war, the conflict grew even more complex. Religious divides began to blur as political ambitions took centre stage, with Catholic France supporting Protestant Sweden to counterbalance Habsburg power. This shifting landscape of alliances revealed the deeper currents driving the war, a struggle not just of faith, but of power and control over Europe's future. Gustavus Adolphus's role in the 30 Years' War is a testament to the transformative power of leadership and innovation. His contributions brought hope to a fractured alliance and altered the course of a seemingly endless conflict. Yet, his death also reminded the world of the fleeting nature of triumph in the face of war's relentless toll. As we prepare to move to the next chapter, take a moment to reflect on the determination and vision it takes to bring change amid chaos. In the darkest times, even a single leader can leave an indelible mark, and yet the storm of history moves forward, carrying all in its wake. As the 30 Years' War stretched into its second decade, the conflict expanded beyond its original boundaries, engulfing nearly all of Europe in its relentless grasp. Nations that had once remained on the sidelines found themselves drawn into the fray, whether by alliances, ambitions, or the sheer inevitability of the war's momentum. The entry of France in 1635 marked a dramatic shift. Though a Catholic nation, France allied with Protestant powers like Sweden to counterbalance the Habsburgs' influence. This decision underscored how the war had evolved from a religious conflict into a broader struggle for political dominance in Europe. The stage was set for what would become one of the most destructive periods of the war. As alliances grew ever more complex and battles became increasingly brutal. Across the continent, the toll of the war was staggering. Cities were besieged and burned. Fields were left barren and lifeless, and villages were emptied as civilians fled the advancing armies. Mercenary forces, often poorly paid and motivated by survival, resorted to pillaging and looting, leaving devastation in their wake. Famine and disease swept through war-torn regions, taking more lives than the battles themselves. As you listen to this story, let the gravity of these events drift gently through your thoughts, but not linger. Imagine the chaos of the time slowly fading into the background, replaced by a sense of quiet reflection. Feel the weight of the war's hardship giving way to an understanding of resilience, a reminder of humanity's enduring strength even in its darkest hours. The conflict's scope seemed endless, with battles erupting in regions as far-reaching as the Rhineland, the Netherlands, and northern Italy. Yet amid the turmoil, moments of diplomacy and negotiation emerged, offering brief glimpses of hope. Peace talks began to take shape, though they were slow and fraught with challenges, reflecting the deep divisions and mistrust among the warring parties. Let these moments of negotiation remind you that even in the midst of chaos, there are always efforts toward resolution. Allow yourself to relax further, your breath steady and calm, as if tracing the contours of history's slow march toward peace. As we move deeper into the story, the resilience of the people and the shifting tides of war remind us of the impermanence of struggle. Take this moment to let your mind ease. Let the complexity of the 30 Years' War unravel gently, leaving you with a sense of quiet perspective and peace. After nearly 3 decades of relentless conflict, Europe began to seek an end to the devastation. The 30 Years' War had taken a toll unlike any before it. Economies were ruined, lands were ravaged, and millions of lives had been lost. By the early 1640s, the warring nations realized that no decisive victory was in sight. The war had devolved into a stalemate of exhaustion. Thus began the long and complex journey toward peace, through the negotiations that would culminate in the Peace of Westphalia. The Westphalian negotiations were unprecedented in their scope and ambition. For the first time in European history, nearly all major powers gathered to discuss terms of peace. Delegates from Catholic and Protestant states, as well as representatives from France, Sweden, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire, met in the towns of Münster and Osnabrück. These talks would last for years, reflecting the complexity of the issues at hand and the deep mistrust between the parties. As the negotiations unfolded, the participants wrestled with questions of religion, sovereignty, and the balance of power. The Peace of Westphalia sought to establish a new order in Europe, one that would recognize the religious and political realities that had emerged from the war. Protestant and Catholic states agreed to a form of mutual tolerance, reaffirming the principle that rulers could determine their state's religion, while also granting greater freedoms to minority faiths. The treaty also redefined the concept of sovereignty. It marked the beginning of the modern state system, where nations recognized each other's territorial boundaries and agreed not to interfere in one another's internal affairs. This idea of state sovereignty would become a cornerstone of international relations for centuries to come. While the Peace of Westphalia brought an end to the 30 Years' War, its provisions were not without compromise. No side emerged as a clear victor, and many of the underlying tensions remained unresolved. Yet, the treaty succeeded in ending the immediate bloodshed and creating a framework for coexistence in a fractured Europe. As you listen to the conclusion of this chapter, let the idea of resolution fill your thoughts. Picture the weary negotiators, coming together after years of strife, finding common ground in the hope of a better future. Let this image remind you that even in the most challenging times, peace is always within reach. The road to peace was long and arduous, yet it proved that dialogue and compromise can overcome even the deepest divisions. Allow this lesson to settle within you as you relax further, your mind at ease, as the echoes of war fade into the calm promise of resolution. As the Peace of Westphalia brought an end to the 30 Years' War, Europe began to rebuild from the ashes of its most devastating conflict. The war left an indelible mark on the continent, shaping the course of history in profound ways. Nations that had been battered and broken emerged with new identities, while the concept of sovereignty laid the foundation for the modern nation-state system. The war's legacy extended beyond politics and borders. It changed the way conflicts were waged, highlighting the immense cost of prolonged war and the devastating impact on civilian populations. The lessons of the 30 Years' War echoed across generations, reminding humanity of the importance of diplomacy, tolerance, and restraint. This story of destruction and eventual reconciliation carries a timeless message. Even in the darkest of times, there is always a path forward, a path forged through perseverance, negotiation, and the willingness to find common ground. The 30 Years' War may have scarred Europe, but it also served as a turning point, proving that peace, though hard won, is always worth striving for. As we close this chapter of history, take a moment to reflect on the resilience of the human spirit. Let the story of the 30 Years' War remind you of the strength found in unity and the power of resolution. Think of the nations and individuals who rebuilt after so much loss, their journey, though difficult, leading to a more stable and interconnected future. Now let the soothing sounds of rain guide you to a place of peace and relaxation. Imagine gentle raindrops falling softly on leaves, washing away the echoes of history's struggles. Feel the rhythm of the rain bringing calm to your mind and a sense of quiet to your soul. Now we'll delve into the events leading up to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, one of the most tense and dramatic moments of the Cold War, and how this extraordinary conflict unfolded. The Cuban Missile Crisis didn't arise in a vacuum. It was the culmination of years of Cold War tensions, a time when the world seemed to teeter on the edge of uncertainty. Imagine, for a moment, the quiet hum of the post-war era giving way to the slow, steady march of ideological rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. This rivalry, like a deep and resonant drumbeat, echoed across the globe, shaping the landscapes of diplomacy and conflict alike. The United States, with its vision of democracy, and the Soviet Union, determined to spread communism, found themselves locked in a careful and delicate dance, their every move calculated, every gesture weighted with significance. By the early 1960s, this struggle had already seen pivotal moments, like the Berlin blockade and the Korean War, leaving an enduring imprint on the hearts and minds of millions. Then came 1959, a turning point that brought Cuba into sharp focus. The Cuban Revolution swept through the island like a soft but unrelenting wind, carrying Fidel Castro to power and replacing the Batista regime. Under Castro, Cuba aligned itself with the Soviet Union, transforming into a communist stronghold just 90 miles from American shores, a distance so short it might as well have been a whisper across the ocean. This proximity brought with it a quiet but undeniable unease, a tension that settled in the minds of US leaders like a lingering shadow. The hum of covert operations soon followed, culminating in the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. This misstep, like a ripple in still water, spread embarrassment for the Kennedy administration and deepened the chasm of mistrust between the US and Cuba. At the same time, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, ever watchful and calculating, saw an opportunity to exploit this growing divide. He began to weave a plan that would take full advantage of Cuba's location, creating a web of uncertainty and anticipation that seemed to stretch endlessly across the calm skies. As we linger in this moment of reflection, picture a world on edge yet still wrapped in quiet resolve. Let these images and thoughts drift gently through your mind, like leaves carried by a slow, steady current. The stage was set, each thread of tension delicately placed, weaving the intricate fabric of what would soon become one of the most dramatic and perilous moments in modern history. In the quiet skies of October 14th, 1962, something extraordinary unfolded, something that would ripple through time like a soft, endless wave. High above the peaceful landscapes of Cuba, an American U-2 reconnaissance plane glided effortlessly, its sleek form cutting through the stillness of the heavens. From its vantage point, the plane captured a series of photographs, silent yet profound, revealing a truth that would shake the world. Soviet missile sites, nestled discreetly amidst the lush and tranquil countryside, were under construction. These were no ordinary missiles. Their presence was like a whisper of something immense and dangerous, carrying with them the potential for devastation. Capable of reaching the heart of the United States within mere moments, these medium and intermediate range ballistic missiles carried the weight of a silent, looming threat. The images, delicate and unassuming, were swiftly brought back to Washington, where they were met with a storm of hushed urgency and careful deliberation. Picture the scene as President John F. Kennedy and his advisors gathered in the stillness of the White House. The room was heavy with the quiet murmur of voices, each one low and deliberate as the photographs were laid out like puzzle pieces on a smooth, polished table. The gravity of the discovery hung in the air, a presence as tangible as the tick of a distant clock. Each second stretched slow and steady, like the rhythm of a deep and calming breath. As the advisors spoke, their words mingled with the ambient quiet, and the room seemed to hold its breath. It became clear that this was not just a military challenge, but a profound shift in the balance of power. The missiles in Cuba mirrored the US's own installations in Turkey, creating a precarious symmetry of threat that deepened the unease. This delicate balance, like a tightrope suspended above a chasm, demanded extraordinary care and calm. For a moment, close your eyes and imagine the scene. The soft rustle of papers, the distant hum of voices, and the unspoken tension that lingers in the air like a gentle mist. This was a time of reflection, a time when the world seemed poised on the edge of a decision that could change everything. Yet, amidst the tension, there was also a stillness, a fragile sense of order holding back the chaos beyond. As the president and his team weighed their options, the choices before them seemed infinite, like waves rolling gently onto a shore. Diplomacy, military action, or something in between, each decision carried the weight of an uncertain future. But for now, in this moment, let these thoughts settle, like leaves falling softly to the ground, as the story gently unfolds further into the night. In the days that followed the Discover, the world seemed to move in slow motion, each moment drawn out as though the air itself had grown thicker, heavier. President Kennedy and his advisors, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, often referred to as ExComm, met repeatedly in the quiet, reflective halls of the White House. Their discussions, careful and deliberate, centered on one pressing question: how to respond to this grave discovery. The choices before them were as weighty as the stillness that filled the room. One option was a military strike to destroy the missile sites, swift and decisive. Another was a full-scale invasion of Cuba, an action that would surely provoke a direct confrontation with the Soviet Union. But even as these strategies were considered, their risks loomed large, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. A misstep could spark the very thing they all feared: a nuclear war that might engulf the world in unimaginable devastation. Amid the tense deliberations, a third option emerged, one that seemed to offer a chance for resolution without immediate violence: a naval quarantine of Cuba. This option, though less aggressive, was no less bold. By establishing a blockade to prevent further delivery of Soviet missiles and military equipment to the island, the United States could demonstrate its resolve while leaving room for diplomacy to take hold. The term quarantine was chosen carefully, softer than blockade, to avoid the suggestion of an act of war. Picture, if you will, the long pauses between words as the advisors weighed this plan. Their voices, low and measured, filled the space like the gentle lapping of waves against a shore. The room, dimly lit and hushed, seemed to hold its breath as the implications of the quarantine began to crystallize. Would it be enough to deter the Soviets, or would it provoke them into escalating the conflict further? The question lingered, unanswered, like a faint echo in the stillness. On October 22nd, 1962, President Kennedy addressed the nation in a speech that broke the quiet tension of those days. His calm and steady voice carried across the airwaves, explaining the situation and announcing the quarantine. He described the missiles in Cuba as a secret, swift, and extraordinary build-up, and made it clear that the United States would not tolerate this threat so close to its shores. Yet, even in this moment of firm resolve, there was an undercurrent of hope, a hope that reason might prevail, that diplomacy might yet find a path through the shadows of uncertainty. Imagine the millions of listeners across the world, leaning closer to their radios, their breaths slowing as the words sank in. The quarantine was now in place, a quiet but firm line drawn in the waters around Cuba. The decision was made, yet the outcome remained unknown, hanging in the air like a gentle mist at dawn. As we move forward, let these thoughts rest gently in your mind, like whispers carried on a cool, soothing breeze as we drift deeper into this unfolding story. Take a moment. Breathe deeply, slowly, and imagine the calm before a storm, the kind of quiet that hums with anticipation when time seems to stretch and every second feels longer than the last. This was the atmosphere as the United States naval quarantine of Cuba went into effect on October 24, 1962. The blockade was not just a line drawn in the water, it was a test of wills between two superpowers. American warships moved into position, forming a silent, steady wall in the ocean, ready to intercept any Soviet vessels attempting to deliver more missiles or military supplies to Cuba. These ships, though distant from the shorelines, carried with them the weight of a global audience's gaze as the world watched and waited, holding its collective breath. Far away in the stillness of the Kremlin, Premier Khrushchev faced his own moment of reflection. Soviet ships were already en route to Cuba, some carrying cargo that would challenge the blockade directly. Would they stop or press on? To retreat might signal weakness, to advance might spark open conflict. The tension was palpable, an invisible thread pulling tighter with each passing hour. Imagine the seas, vast and unyielding, their surface calm but concealing a profound sense of unease beneath. The American ships floated silently, their crews ready but motionless, listening to the soft rhythm of the waves and the low hum of the engines. Across the Atlantic, the Soviet vessels continued their approach, the space between them shrinking slowly, steadily, like the narrowing of a great and ominous gulf. Back in Washington, the ExComm held near-constant meetings, their discussions now carrying the gravity of the quarantine's first test. Reports from the blockade zone came in, each one met with careful deliberation. The tension in those rooms was thick, almost tangible, as though it might spill out into the world beyond. Every voice was measured, every pause significant, as the weight of their decisions pressed down like a blanket of still and heavy air. Then, on October the 25th, an eerie moment of calm arrived. The Soviet ships stopped just short of the blockade line. This pause, this single moment of restraint, was both a relief and a reminder of how precariously balanced the situation remained. Khrushchev sent a message proposing negotiations, a glimmer of light breaking through the clouds of uncertainty. For a moment, let your mind linger on this fragile quiet. Imagine the stillness of the ocean, the distant shapes of the ships, and the muffled sounds of calm activity on deck. It was a pause, but not yet a resolution, like the faintest hint of dawn before the sun begins to rise. As the world held its breath, the next moves remained uncertain, waiting to unfold with the slow and deliberate pace of history itself. Pause for a moment. Let the tension of the previous days fade, and allow yourself to sink into this pivotal chapter, a time when words, not weapons, became the instruments of a potential resolution. As the blockade held firm and Soviet ships paused in their advance, the crisis shifted from the oceans to the realm of communication. It was now a battle of letters and messages, where every word carried the weight of the world. On October 26th, Premier Khrushchev sent the first of two letters to President Kennedy. It was a message of emotion and urgency, filled with words that seemed almost pleading, like whispers carried on a breeze. Khrushchev proposed a resolution. The Soviet Union would withdraw its missiles from Cuba if the United States would promise not to invade the island. The tone was personal, almost vulnerable, as if Khrushchev sought to reach Kennedy not as an adversary, but as a fellow human standing on the precipice of disaster. The next day, however, brought a second letter, different in tone, harsher, more calculated. This one demanded that the United States also remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey, an escalation that added a new layer of complexity to the already delicate negotiations. These letters, arriving like waves in succession, left Kennedy and his advisers navigating treacherous waters. Which message represented Khrushchev's true intent? Was this a sincere offer or a ploy to gain an upper hand? In the stillness of the White House, Kennedy and the ex-com deliberated late into the night. Their discussions were careful, deliberate, each word spoken slowly, as if to avoid disturbing the fragile balance they were trying to maintain. The question lingered in the air like the soft echo of distant footsteps. How could they accept the first offer without appearing weak, while also avoiding a direct confrontation that might spiral into war? Imagine the quiet of those rooms, filled only with the faint rustling of papers and the low hum of thought. It was a moment of immense pressure, but also one of profound restraint, as though the weight of their decisions was held aloft by a delicate and invisible thread. Finally, Kennedy made his choice. He responded to Khrushchev's first letter, agreeing to the proposal of a non-invasion pledge in exchange for the removal of the missiles from Cuba. The Jupiter missiles in Turkey were not mentioned in this reply, a deliberate omission meant to simplify the path to resolution. At the same time, Robert Kennedy, the president's brother and attorney general, quietly met with Soviet ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin to discuss the removal of the Turkish missiles as a separate, unofficial arrangement. As the letters were exchanged, the world waited in silence. Imagine millions of hearts beating slowly, steadily, as the fate of humanity seemed to hang in the balance. This was diplomacy at its most fragile, like a fine thread spun across an open void. And yet, in that fragility, there was also hope, a faint but growing light at the end of a long and shadowed tunnel. Let this, though, drift gently through your mind as we move toward the final chapter of this remarkable story, where the crisis finds its resolution and the world begins to exhale. As the sun rose on October 28, 1962, the world awoke to a glimmer of relief. Premier Khrushchev announced that the Soviet Union would dismantle and remove its missiles from Cuba. His decision, conveyed in a public radio broadcast, marked the end of the 13-day standoff that had brought humanity to the brink of nuclear war. The missiles, he declared, would be taken apart and the weaponry returned to the Soviet Union under United Nations supervision. For President Kennedy, this was a moment of cautious triumph. The US quarantine had succeeded in forcing a peaceful resolution without resorting to violence. The secret agreement to remove the American Jupiter missiles from Turkey added a layer of complexity but remained undisclosed to the public, allowing both nations to save face in the eyes of the world. In the following days, work began to de-escalate the situation. Soviet personnel in Cuba started dismantling the missile sites, and American reconnaissance planes confirmed the progress. Meanwhile, the US ships maintained their positions until the removal was complete, standing as quiet sentinels of the fragile peace that now settled over the Caribbean. The resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis was hailed as a victory for diplomacy, but it left an enduring impact on both nations. In the United States, Kennedy emerged as a skilled leader who had successfully navigated the most dangerous crisis of the Cold War. For Khrushchev, the crisis was a humbling moment that exposed the limits of Soviet power and, in part, contributed to his eventual removal from office. Yet, the aftermath also brought reflection. The sheer proximity to disaster prompted both superpowers to reconsider their approach to conflict and diplomacy. In 1963, the two nations established the Moscow-Washington Hotline, a direct communication link designed to prevent misunderstandings and delays in future crises. It was a small but significant step toward reducing the risk of nuclear confrontation. Imagine the stillness of those post-crisis days. The world, so recently shadowed by the threat of annihilation, now seemed quieter, calmer, as if holding its breath in gratitude. The Cuban Missile Crisis had shown how close humanity could come to its own destruction, and how essential it was to step back from the edge. In the years that followed, the crisis became a symbol of both the dangers of the nuclear age and the power of restraint and diplomacy. It remains a reminder of the delicate balance that sustains peace and the courage required to preserve it. As we reflect on the Cuban Missile Crisis, we realize its profound significance in shaping the trajectory of history. These 13 days in October 1962 were more than just a tense standoff between two superpowers. They were a moment when humanity stood on the edge of a precipice, where the future of the world hung in the balance. The resolution of the crisis, through diplomacy, restraint, and the courage to seek peace, reminds us of the fragile nature of our existence and the deep responsibility we all share to preserve it. The Cuban Missile Crisis serves as a testament to the power of careful communication and the importance of maintaining calm in the face of peril. It is a reminder that even in our darkest moments, when fear and uncertainty seem overwhelming, it is possible to find a path toward peace through understanding and cooperation. The decisions made during that crisis, by leaders and diplomats alike, were not just about averting disaster, but about fostering a future in which humanity could move forward, together, with a deeper commitment to avoiding the devastation of war. This story, with all its tension and drama, carries with it a profound sense of satisfaction, knowing that through diplomacy, cooler heads prevailed. The crisis could have led to a catastrophe, but instead, it ended with the restoration of a delicate peace, and as we find comfort in that resolution, we can allow ourselves to drift into a space of tranquility, knowing that even in the most tumultuous times, peace is always within our reach if we dare to reach for it. As we close this chapter on the Cuban Missile Crisis, take a moment to feel the weight of history's lessons wash over you, soothing your mind and heart. The story, though intense, carries with it a sense of relief and calm, a reminder that peace, like the most gentle rain, can cleanse even the deepest tensions. Now, as we begin to let go of these thoughts, allow the soft sound of rain in the background to fill your senses. Let the music gently carry you, like a breeze through the trees, into a state of deep relaxation. The calm, steady rhythm of the rain, with its soothing patter and the quiet hum of the night, will help you unwind fully, offering a peaceful escape as you settle into a restful sleep. Thank you for joining us on this journey with the History and Sleep crew, and may it inspire you to cherish the quiet moments we find in our own lives. Sleep well, let the rain's embrace soothe you, and allow your dreams to carry you to a place of calm, reflection, and serenity. Sweet dreams.